Thank you, Sunil. I'm Andy Serwer from Yahoo Finance, and this is our esteemed panel. And they're going to tell you that Silicon Valley is done, completely done. Okay, that China is taking over completely. Silicon Valley, forget it's dead. Maybe that's just a bit of a provocation, so we'll get to that straight away. So, Yang Ge from the Financial Times in China, you actually emailed me and said, come on, that's a little bit of an overstatement that Silicon Valley is completely dead and China's taking over. So where do things stand between technology in China and what's happening in Silicon Valley, do you think?
Yes, thank you, Andy, for your very good question. So I don't think that China has already surpassed the US to be the leader of the global technology world. I think China is in the position of leading follower instead of leading leader. So I will give you some reasons. The first reason I think is the difference of innovation model. For the last couple of decades, as we all know, the only way that China has to approach to innovation is doing the application of existing technology, which means Chinese companies are really good at doing things from 1 to 100. And compared to the US company, I think as Peter Thiel has wrote the book, which is from 0 to 1. So for US companies, they are really good at doing the original technologies. I have to say, nowadays, the more and more Chinese companies, they are doing their original technologies, research, but I think there's still, we have to wait a little bit longer. That's the first reason. And the second reason is about the investment you have input into the research and the development area. According to a research conducted by PwC last year, the research shows that the US companies has spent 5 times more money than the Chinese competitors in the research and the development area. So that means the US companies spend $1. The only Chinese companies spend $1. I do understand there are lots of Chinese companies, they spend a lot of money. For example, Video Plus, for example, Huawei. But overall, the whole Chinese companies still haven't have this mentality to invest into the original research. That's the two reasons. And the last reason is about the US itself. Because I think the innovation hub has transferred from Silicon Valley to other places, for example, Boston, because these places are focusing on hard technology, which is the next stage of the technology development. So that's my reasons. Thank you.
Good deal. Okay, and you're a journalist, to be clear. Come on, right?
Yes.
So we're going to talk, these guys are practitioners, and we're both journalists over here. So William, you're doing work both in the U.S. and in China, and why don't you just quickly talk about what you're doing and who you are, and then talk a little bit about how that relates to what Yang was saying with regard to copying versus creating technology in China versus the United States.
Right.
That's a lot, but go ahead.
Yeah. Well, hello everyone. I'm William. So 6 years ago, in Boston, I was in university. I was a third-year university student, and we were watching a soccer game. So we saw this guy, scored, and we loved his shoes. And I wanted to buy his shoes right there within the video. But we went onto Google, and there was no result. So I asked my professor, what if there exists a technology right there that allow you to purchase the shoes just by clicking on it right within the video? So that was the start of my story. So after 6 years, this year we just finished Series C funding led by Alibaba. It was $200 million valued at 1.2 billion. And this, right now, what you can do is, this exactly when you're watching videos, let's say Andy is in a video, and I like his shoes, or I like his pants. You can click on it. And right there, you're able to buy it. Well, honestly, sorry, I don't like your pants.
Maybe not, okay. Come on, man, that's not right.
Yeah.
Okay.
But you see the difference? There's, so 6 years ago, I think US has a much better environment in you can create something new in the US. But the reason we went from US, 4 years ago, I brought this business to China, to Shanghai. And I saw that there's a big change, there's a big trend in that now China has a bigger economy, and this can fuel its innovation. Today, if you just bring a cell phone, this cell phone has Alipay or Tencent Pay, you don't need your wallet anymore. But now here, as we're in Portugal, I was jogging these days for 8 kilometers every day. I need to bring these bills and these coins. I can't just bring my phone. You know, this is so funny, but this is what's happening in the Western and Chinese world. So that is my answer. Thank you.
Thank you. And Chad, I want to talk to you a little bit about that similar kind of thing. And is there, a parallel internet in China versus the West? I mean, you see a totally different ecosystem that doesn't really interact with the ecosystem in the United States and Europe. I mean, you talk about Tencent and JD and Alibaba, they're primarily Chinese companies, right?
Yeah, let's go back to the topic to start from. Today's topic is, I would say, is more of a media approach. In media's point of view, putting a like like today is a make perfect sense because controversial topics get attention. So, but don't take it seriously.
Fake news?
I mean, for today's topic.
Okay. All right, go ahead.
I think
I'll let you go.
Imagine you guys, how many of you come here because of this topic? If you get here, for the topic, you are got by this media. But on business side, we have a different perception. We ourselves have an operation in Silicon Valley and also in Shenzhen, as well as in Berlin. We're kind of a global company. I think even though the topic is more of a media approach, it reflects a competition, either from US to China or vice versa. But in business standing point of view, competition have a totally different meaning. Today's panel topic is more like reminding me like boxing. Mm-hmm. When two people on boxing field, either you knock me out or I knock you out. It's a winner. But business competition is a totally different parameter. The competition is in many ways is targeting to a healthy end. By competition, you are not fighting with your competitor. You are fighting for the customer. Each competition is trying to use their unique technology and unique business model to attract the customer. By taking as many as customer, it's winning the competition. So the focus is not beating your opponent, is how to get your customer. Taking that regard, today's world, you can see a very diversified marketplace. There are different users in China, in the States, and also in Europe. If you can develop your niche market and serve your customer, you are a winner of that unique market. Getting back to your question, the Alibaba and Tencent, you can find their counterparts in the States. WeChat is versus WhatsApp in the States, and Alibaba was versus Amazon in the States. Even though they are in the same runway, but they develop their unique business model and adapt themselves to the local market. The user in China and the user in the States, they have different expectation. That also answers the question why some of the global companies have a hard time in other countries.
Right.
The Alibaba in US and also the Amazon in China.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I'm sorry to jump
Yes.
in. Let me ask William, though. So what is the best way for, say, an entrepreneur to access the Chinese market? Say you're a digital entrepreneur. I mean, can you go in and start a business? Can you go in and get capital? Or are these two worlds separate?
Well, funny you ask. We talked about the exact same question in the CIS summit 2 days ago. So the conclusion was, if you're a Western business and you want to enter the Chinese market, first thing you do is you need to find a person, a CEO, who's Chinese and know the Chinese market very well. That's the first thing you need to do. So if you want to, let's say if you are a Western company, you can't just find a person you trust in the Western and send him to China. That's not going to work. This is exactly what Uber did in China. So Uber entered the Chinese market in 2014, and soon, and I think within 2 years of time, became one of the two largest players in China, because Google found a very smart and capable Chinese local person in charge of the business, and Uber gave him the exact big power as a CEO to do all the management rights in China. So I think that's the conclusion we had the other day, and I think that's something we need to consider, all the businesses need to consider when they enter China.
I mean, is that possible to do?
It's very hard it's very hard at the beginning, because you need to find and trust someone you don't know.
Yeah.
Simple as that. But if you want to excel or thrive in China, you must do that.
Have a local partner.
Mm-hmm.
Yang, I want to ask you, I mean, you're just a keen observer of what's been going on over the past several years with regard to technology in China. How has the marketplace changed? I mean, we talked about Tencent, JD, Baba. They weren't even on the map 10 years ago, at least from the West. But just over the past 3 and 5 years, there's political change, technological change, the new giants. What are the things that are striking you?
Okay, I think I can share with you two very small stories. The first one is about my mom. She is 16 years old. She retired this year, but she has 2 mobile phones. I only have 1. She has 2 mobile phones. The one is she communicated with her relatives, families, and colleagues for family, private things. And the other mobile phone she is using for buying things online. And she has no problem with these new technologies. She would use JD, Alibaba, anything, and book things online. That's really convenient. So from this perspective, I see the very kind of openness of Chinese customers. Everyone in China nowadays embrace these new technologies. So I think that's the most important driving force for the development of Chinese companies such as Alibaba and Tencent. Because I talked to Andy before our panel that Tencent and Alibaba actually are not international companies.
Right.
They are relatively Chinese company, but they are giant. So because of the customers, they have changed a lot. That's one thing. And the other thing I would like to share with you is about the business environment. 3 days later, which is November 11th, that's I think it's the ordinary day for most of you, but it's a very special shopping day for Chinese customers. I remember last year, the customers buy things online from Alibaba. The money they spend break a history, which is maybe more than 120 billion US dollars. Yeah. So for Alibaba, they have to deal with 89,000 payments 1 second in the peak hour. So you can say this big data really driving Chinese customers to become the top leaders in the future. But I have to say, this is only on the business side. We still lack this vision to input more into the fundamental science side. So we have to reform our university kind of system to create more talents. We have to input more into the original research system. That's what we are going to do. So that's what I have observed for the last few years.
Right. The 11/11 thing that Alibaba created, Singles Day, I mean, is just incredible genius on their part. I mean, they created the biggest national shopping holiday on the planet.
Yes.
And a company did that.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like Christmas, Valentine's Day, and everything else all wrapped up in one. And they just figured it out. It's a day to buy a gift for yourself, the singles thing. It's just amazing. So, Chad, I want to get back to you. And it's interesting to me, you do business in Berlin, Boston, Silicon Valley, and Shenzhen. So you're on those 3 continents. And I want to ask you specifically about the differences. You hear that in the West, entrepreneurs are more product-focused, whereas in China, they're more ecosystem-focused. Is that the case, or what are the differences between Europe, the United States, and China when it comes to entrepreneurship and venture?
For venture-wise, I can see there are many mutual flow, capital-wise and also start company-wise. I've seen there's quite several outstanding Silicon Valley capital get into China, Sequoia, GGV, and those companies, and making very huge success in China. And in the meanwhile, China investors get into U.S., trying to invest in China, in U.S., invest into deep tech companies. And the more we expand, the more I believe in globalization. The free flow of capital and technology is actually generate the most benefit for humankind. And for ourselves, I think talking about the difference of entrepreneur. I've been talking with multiple investors in China and also in Europe. There is a difference since today's event is held in Europe. In my own past experience, when I talk with a startup company, U.S. startup company and China's startup company shares much in common. They are very ambitious, think very big. From day one, they're dreaming of build a global giant company. But in general, in Europe, somehow the startup company I talk to with the entrepreneur, they tend not to be so ambitious. They tend to be creating a business, make a decent living, but not as a dream big as a U.S. and the China startups. That's also a question I'm very curious. And if you have any thoughts to share, I would love to get connected. So send me my message.
That's a really interesting point. I'd love to know. I mean, that speaks to sort of continental psychology, maybe, if what you're saying is accurate. But I mean, I guess you'd have to say maybe there are more internet giants in China and the United States than in Europe. So maybe there's some truth to that. I don't know. It's touchy stuff, though. We got to be careful with that. So William, I want to turn to you for probably the last question, and that is, so this question, is China going to supersede Silicon Valley and continue to dominate and get bigger and bigger, or will there be some sort of parity? Look into the crystal ball and tell me what you think about the future and China versus Silicon Valley and maybe Europe as well in terms of startups and technology.
Well, I finished this in 20 seconds.
Yes.
Yeah. I think Chinese economy is a very segregated one. So there's definitely a what we call a ceiling on top of that. But the thing in China, I think the biggest difference is, let's say the PayPal in China is in Alibaba or is in Tencent, but PayPal, Amazon, Google, like Facebook or Apple, these are different companies in different industries. But in China, there's only Alibaba and Tencent that are big guys. So it's kind of like the company itself has ecosystem within them. So this is, I think this is the opportunity, but also this might put a threat into the future growth. So I think nowadays, maybe there are new areas like blockchains, like different new technology areas that still exist chances for companies, startups to grow in. But a lot of industries just shut their doors. So I think this is something we need to think about, and maybe for future entrepreneurs, when they start their business, they need to look into new areas to start with.
Okay. we are going to have to leave it at that. Could you please join me in thanking Chad Xu, William Joy, and Yang Ge? Thank you guys so much.
Thank you, Andy.
Very insightful.